On the surface, this looks like an ordinary playtime for these children, but pay close attention to what you're doing and you realize the continuation of culture from one generation to another through their native language. Before the beginning of colonialism, the African continent had very united ethnic groups and kingdoms, bounded together by their languages. Only natural borders such as rivers, mountains, deserts, or dense forests separated one group or kingdom from the other, until the unimaginable happened exactly 140 years ago in 1884. Okay, before we find out what happened in 1884, I am glad you have clicked on this video to watch this educational documentary on saving our indigenous African languages. I am Ekote Amwakwata, and you will be taking a bit further back in time in order to understand our quest on promoting our languages as Africans. Let's find out why this is so important. First of all, a language carries the history, the knowledge, the identity and the self of a people. It is not just a means of communication, but it is also essentially the culture of a tribe or a nation. Africa. It is the most linguistically diverse continent in the world. Africa has 2,143 living languages and over 8,000 dialects spoken across its 54 countries till this day. The most spoken language in Africa is Swahili or Kiswahili by over 200 million people.
Jump. Jina langu ni Emmanuel Mugiraneza, ninatoka Rwanda, East Africa. Afrika ni nzuri na tunapendezwa na lugha zetu. Hebu tufunze wadogo wetu hizi lugha ndio tujenge kesho yetu ikuwe vizuri. Asante sana.
If you're wondering why I'm making this documentary in a non-African language, English to be precise, it is because of what happened 140 years ago, the Berlin Conference. This led to the partitioning of Africa among European imperial powers, resulting in the colonization of the continent, eventually enforcing the use of the colonial masters' languages. But don't worry, here are examples of how some of my fellow Africans sound in their native languages.
Ebiajinate John Tete Jackman Sweetie.
Magadizvinyu ndinonzi Tanyaranzwa Emily Ngundu, ndiri Nyanduri anobva kuZimbabwe, uye zita rangu rebasa ndiYantaline.
Nkonyenye ehonam dunyo.
Isn't that a treat to your ears? Africa is a complex place, and our complexity is a good thing. It is a resource we have as Africans. Some scholars have tried to come up with a classification of the vast diversity of the native African languages. They have been classified into 4 main language families and several subgroups, namely Niger-Congo, Nilo-Saharan, Afro-Asiatic, and the Khoisan. Despite this beautiful exploration of the vastness of indigenous languages from Africa, we face a very disturbing future because of what the following statistics state. Today, studies show that 13% of indigenous African languages have been classified as extinct or severely endangered as their speakers grow old and die out or shift to speaking other languages, specifically those of the colonial masters, namely English, French, Portuguese, Spanish, and sometimes Italian.
Firstly, it's just incredibly sad that we're at this place now as a people, as Africans. I think of all the things we could have imagined to be the repercussions of colonization, the loss of ourselves, of our languages would have been the last thing. But yeah, for me, the main thing is the loss of identity and self-worth. There is a certain degree of just self-confidence, self-esteem boosting that comes with knowing exactly who you are, where you came from, the language that you speak. And the one thing that sort of ties that together, it's our language. It's how we communicate with our people and those of our land. So now when those go extinct, the ripple effects on individuals is that, number one, we will lose our identity as people. Number two, with the loss of identity comes, identity crises or confusion. And with that confusion comes just, this rush of wanting to find ourselves and never being able to do so. And so that's when we appropriate other identities that are not our own. And the danger is that you can never truly, fit into the cultural and just ethnical, identity of another person. No matter how much you try, even if you were born into that culture, there's just a certain degree of, otherness that will always come. And with that sort of stripping of identity as well, it means that anybody can tell you what they want you to be, and you'll take it because you don't know who you are.
People are losing their pride in their local languages. I would say that's what's affected the decline. Because so I got to a certain age, I always believed in the stereotypes I was faced. But when I went to the Volta region myself, I saw that it was just word of mouth. And as a result of these stereotypes, people have lost the pride in their language. And as a result, it's contributing to the decline in the native language spoken. Because every Ghanaian language, local language, has this stereotype that goes around. So people try to disassociate themselves from that, and they speak the foreign language so as not to be pegged or stereotyped by other people.
These are the challenges that I think we Africans are being compelled to speak English language, right, which is foreign to us. So the challenge is we don't have mastery over the language. We are not confident enough because at the end of the day, we are not able to express our thoughts, our feelings. Issues that is affecting us for our colleagues to really understand us. So it becomes a challenge.
It remains a fact that exposure through diversity is the main way we can teach people to different cultures that exist in the world. Most Africans are losing their identity. It is funny how we are not able to speak the so-called big languages such as English, Spanish, or French properly, yet we fail to have control over our own mother tongue and indigenous languages. It is a fact that colonialism have compelled most Africans to become bi- and multilingualist, although our indigenous languages are not given the needed recognition internationally.
Colonialism and globalization, those two are just, I can't even say gifts that keep on giving. Well, gifts that keep on giving in the very negative sense. They've impacted my native language and culture mostly in a very negative sense. I'm around children who grew up on Disney, all these foreign, American shows, and they sort of borrowed those Disney identities, Disney language, Disney accents even, and they've made them their own, or at least they've tried to make them their own. And so what that does is, they grow up with a sense of inferiority towards their own language, which is why we are where we are right now, where everybody is going to have to use English to communicate, and it's just a mess. I can't put it into true words, but it's just such a big negative mess. And you find that even in our languages, the whole inferiority thing I was referring to, there are certain phrases that hint to white supremacy. So for example, anything that is good, anything that is of quality, anything that is of worth, it's associated with white people. An example, a slang word for someone's boss or just manager or anyone of a high-ranking position, it's murungu, which means white person. So someone will use that in day-to-day conversation, like murungu wangu andifonera, which translates to my boss has called me. And anything on the other side, anything that's associated with just negativity, darkness. It's associated with Black people. Some words, even this one called Maboy, it stems from the colonial era where, you know, Black people, fathers and mothers, were called boy. And we still use that to this day. We're not even aware of what we're saying. We're not even aware of its roots. But people will use that to say Maboy, to refer to their fellow Black people and say, for example, Maboya Nonetsa, which means Black people are difficult, or Black Zimbabweans are difficult. So it's just those little nuances in our language which hint to, you know, superiority of the colonizer and inferiority of the colonized, and how they play out in our day-to-day interactions, in our thought patterns, how we process ourselves as a people. We now come to the space where you want to find value in a language that is not your own, and you know, parents forcing their kids to speak in English and completely butchering their own native language, just all in the name of, you know, globalization, and they need to fit into the global village at some point. I find that ridiculous, by the way.
It's as a result of the formal education now. There are other forms of education that were there pre-colonialism, and I feel the formal one right now, whereas students are discouraged from speaking their local dialect, has contributed immensely to how proficient students are in their local dialect. And when we talk about globalization, I would say there have been positive and negative effects. Positives are sometimes, right now I can go on TikTok and see everywhere influencers that speak their Berber, and they are communicating in a way and trying to educate people on words that people don't know about in their lives.
All the big tech companies are either in Asia or in the West, and these technologies that we use all over the world today are dominated by Asian and Western languages such as Chinese, Japanese, English, Latin, or French. Africans who use these technologies in their day-to-day activities have little to no interaction on these systems in their local languages. Even alphabets to text in local African languages are not available. These have contributed to the fear I have in the near future unless there's an immediate action in place.
Technology is very important in our lives. It has done us great. It has done a lot of massive, brought a lot of massive development. It is technology that is telling us that tomorrow there's going to be an upgrade. Tomorrow there's going to be this. In the future there's going to be that. But I would say that in as much as it has helped us to understand the perspective of life, it has also, impacted us negatively, because technology is, I would say that it's not favoring Africans, and we are not having that in-depth knowledge of how the technology behaves and how it goes. Again, the new technology in town is artificial intelligence. Now, African languages are not incorporated or deployed in developing this kind of product. And so I would say that at the end of the day, our kids now, they go to school to be taught. They are taught in English. And most of the culture that we learn at schools are Western cultures. Right, eating, even some of the African homes, they are not used to eating with their hands. Why? Because they were taught to use fork and knife and those kind of things. So if the Western world are developing a technology where they only use their language to develop these products, at the end of the day, our kids go to school, learn all these kind of things, come back home and begin to apply. So at the end of the day, there's going to be a drastic reduction in our culture and values and how we do our things. So it's something that is also it's also going to affect us.
One of the possible solutions is that African governments can invest and support in the budding tech scene in Africa to promote the use of African languages among African users of these technologies and information services.
I believe that the absence of African languages or any kind of native languages within the technology and AI space is going to have a very detrimental effect on our languages and our cultures. One of the most, advantageous things about technology is that it serves as a point of reference. You look at the internet, you could literally find anything on the internet. but only if it's documented. So now if we don't document our languages, if we don't document, things to do with our way of life, our culture, etc., what point of reference will we leave for future generations? None whatsoever. And we cannot deny the fact that technology is only going to keep advancing from where it is now. And we might as well, keep up with it and find ways of penetrating that space to sort of serve as an imprint of African languages.
We as Africans can talk all we want about the problems and causes of our dying languages, but there's one thing: we also have to find the solutions to our problems.
I think more social media content, more funny skits, because I always seem to interact more with funny skits where they understand, and it's so nice when you understand a joke and you have to explain it, even though the person won't get it, but you take pride in understanding that joke, and I think it will fall within the trends that are there right now, and people will interact with the language more.
Practically, we do need to, of course, incorporate the use of AI technology in that aspect. I mean, just imagine a Siri or version of Siri or Alexa in your language. I think that's a good start. Obviously, the generations that are existing now are very digital savvy, tech savvy, so they're going to look for everything on the internet. So if you make those things available for them in the most efficient and accurate way, then that's one of the few ways that you can, save your language from going extinct. The second thing is we need to rewire our minds as a people to see the value in our own languages, make native languages cool again, make them pop again and trendy again. I kind of liked what the Wakanda Forever movie did. Or Black Panther, but yeah, those movies. In that they sort of building this new perception of African, countries and African narratives, one that presents us as excellence and not as, the typical poor aid users type of Africans. And so I think if we can make African languages trend again, we are working in a generation that, runs with trends, that runs with, anything that's popping in the time. So I think a practical way to do this would be to find influencers that speak in the native language. You find those kind of influencers, you make them or you package them in a way which is palatable to the, mental eyes of our generation. Make them cool, make them relatable, make them trendy, so that when the next young person sees a native language influencer, for them it's like, oh my god, they're so cool, I want to do that, I want to learn that. And ultimately you're cultivating a new interest in the languages themselves. So let's not be, closed-minded about it. Let's not be rigid. Be as flexible as possible. Use the internet, use technology, to be creative, even in our communities. Schools, actually, let's go with schools as well. Have some kind of incentive for children to speak for children to speak their native language. If possible, to even make it mandatory for them to speak their native language, except in an English or foreign language class. I think that's also another way of doing it, because if you catch young minds whilst they're still young, they're just going to grow up with it and they're going to, take it with them and teach it to their kids.
The following are a few suggestions that my team and I decided to share with you. First, we insist that African leaders must speak publicly in their languages to show the pride in it. We should encourage the writing of more books, literature, and multimedia content in African languages. There should be the investment in African tech scene and also encourage the use of African languages as the main way of sharing information. We also have to employ a deliberate use of African languages in our basic school for children. Finally, we asked that the internet should use translators for several African languages. Nduno dada nekuva mwanawe Africa. Ibwajo saminya kanomro yumu sisi bijimi. Sankofa wowe yenchini. Africa is a complex place, and our complexity remains our biggest resource. Let's speak our indigenous African languages wherever we find ourselves in order to promote and save them from extinction. Because if not now, then when? My name is Akote Amwakwata, reporting for the KT Business Journal from Accra, Ghana.